Let's bring in now the Recastled CEO Kosha Gada. Good to talk to you again, Kosha. You would have been keeping an eye on what's been happening in the state of Florida and elsewhere in the US. That's a shocker of a storm.
It is, and I'm so glad that you showed those two vignettes, Chris, because it is nice to kind of remember the humanity of people, and especially media types who right now often find themselves at the wrong end of public opinion. Overall, that was very nice to see. Yes,
indeed. They cop a lot of flack in the media, and I bag my media colleagues relentlessly, of course, but it is great. They're showing their humanity. They're getting involved with the people they're covering. It was great work. I want to ask you, pick your business brain, your economic brain, to tell us about what's going on in the UK, because we all know about raging inflation and interest rates going up to try and slow that inflation. That's what we're experiencing here in Australia. Yet while all that's happening, Ms Truss, the new Prime Minister, has come in and delivered all these massive tax cuts and energy subsidies. So you got the Bank of England trying to crush spending with interest rates while she's pumping a lot more money into the economy. They've just got two different economic plans operating at once, haven't they?
She, 14 days into her prime ministership, Chris, she finds herself in the eye of the storm, a different storm, the storm of economic calamity. And, it's incredible just what's happened in the last 48 hours. The pound plummeting almost at parity with the US dollar, which has never happened in modern history. Gilts are in trouble. Inflation is rising as interest rates rise. Housing prices are stalling. Mortgages, so many mortgage products have been removed from the marketplace. Median wages are flat. So it's not a pretty picture, to say the least. Now, she's coming in, and I would say she's sort of channeling her inner Thatcher. And it's this argument of, giving tax cuts and the trickle-down effects that does, even in the environment that we're in with the debt, the level of sovereign debt that the UK and many other counterparts have. And you can argue that this is not the time and place to do that. She did these tax cuts against a backdrop of a very different time in the history of the UK relative to the 80s, when Thatcher did a similar thing. However, there is an argument to be made that even still, tax cuts, even with the increased risk of borrowing and the cost of financing those unfunded tax cuts and the debt that would give, there is an argument that it is in line with conservative principles. And she didn't sell it by hiding for the last 8 days. I think that was a mistake. She should have got out front. And if you want to channel your Thatcherism in terms of tax cut policy, channel it as well as with respect to messaging. Her problem is that the bigger problem in that package that they sent is energy policy, which actually didn't get as much attention. And it's more expensive and more risky in terms of financing it than the tax cuts are. And what she needs to do is really shift the needle to getting the UK closer to energy independence sooner rather than later. And the other problem is it did not come attached with any spending cuts. That's a problem in all Western democracies. And unless they do something soon, it's just really difficult to see how this thing sustains.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just have a look at a little bit what Ms Truss had to say here.
It's a difficult time. We're facing a global economic crisis brought about by Putin's war in Ukraine. And what was right is that Britain took decisive action to help people get through what is going to be a difficult winter.
Yeah, so pumping out hundreds of billions of pounds in these energy subsidies, as you say, to try and get people through these high energy prices. I agree with you. That's more problematic because that's more government spending and more government debt. At least the tax cuts are allowing people to keep their own money. But the problem is still that she's at odds with the reserve, the equivalent of their Reserve Bank, their monetary policy. And so she's done a few interviews, and have a look at the reception, have a listen to the reception she's getting from the journalists.
What on earth were you thinking? The country was already in a state of recession. Another says, how can we ever trust the Conservatives with our economy again? And Lydia says, are you ashamed of what you've done? Are you?
I'm talking about the last 4 days. Where have you been? Because we've not heard from you in the last 4 days.
With the interest rates and people's mortgages, they're now worried not only can they heat their homes, but whether they can keep their homes, whether they can afford their mortgages.
Well, tough day. She hasn't even been in the job a month. What should she do, Kosha?
Tough one. I think as I mentioned, the mistake was sort of hiding out for those few days, but that's what's done is done, and she needs to go out there. I don't get a sense from her of sort of like the gravitas that you need if you're going to do the tax cut policy, like really being able to sell that And you can frame it in moral terms, that you're just returning people's money, as you say. You can frame it in terms of why it's useful, in terms of trickle-down economics. I didn't really get that much. She's sort of on the back foot. But I think her problem is around the spending and energy cuts. Unless she comes out with something really meaningful on that side, at some point it's hard to sell the message. The other problem, too, is leaders of every country, they're speaking to multiple audiences at the same time. And so she's speaking to her people. She's worried about the polling, the position of her party relative to Labour, the investor community, and everything else. So she's going to have to thread that needle. And I think the biggest win for her would be something dramatic around energy policy, moving away from net zero, which is the elephant in the room. And
yes,
if she has the courage to do that remains to be seen, but that's her opportunity.
Now, I don't want to turn this into picking on the female leaders tonight, but have a look at Kamala Harris here at the DMZ, getting North Korea and South Korea all mixed up.
The United States shares a very important relationship, which is an alliance with the Republic of North Korea. And it is an alliance that is strong and enduring.
When I first saw that, Kosha, I thought she'd defected.
That was an unfortunate slip of the tongue, Chris. And I think, very similar to the Truss story in the UK, there's policy, and they're presiding over a very difficult time in U.S. history as well. And then there's packaging and presentation, and those types of gaffes don't help. There's a reason why her approval rating is in the 30s. President Biden's is in the 40s, if you even believe the polls. And, that doesn't do a lot to help lend credibility and confidence to the American public and, frankly, the world.
It sure does not. Thanks for joining us, Kosha. Have a great weekend.